Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Chilliwack Now with former Mayor Clint Hames and me, Paul Henderson, editor of the Chilliwack Progress.
This episode, we want to talk about inclusion. It's a word that's applied in many ways in our world and perhaps is best understood from the perspective of people that have, in some ways and various reasons, been excluded from the typical existence that most of us live.
I think most of us would suggest that we include a diverse group of people in our lives, and we don't like to think of our community as excluding people. But is that the real lived experience of people with disabilities, people of color, members of the LGBTQ plus community?
After this quick break and a word from our sponsor, Zacharias Vickers, we're going to be right back and we're going to explore this very interesting topic.
Our first guest is Dan Coulter. As everyone knows, Dan is a former board chair of the Chilliwack School District, which has had its share of issues related to inclusion. Dan is also the MLA for Chilliwack and has some specific responsibilities related to ensuring equity and inclusion of all people in our province.
And of course, Dan also uses a wheelchair as a part of his mobility in his daily life, and that often means he probably has a label of disabled from time to time, which means he likely has experienced exclusion in some form or discrimination in some form himself. So I think a great guest for us to have to talk about the issue of how do we build a more inclusive community. Yeah. Starting off, Dan, well, you were going to jump right in, Paul? No, I was just going to say...
We're so excited, we can't decide who.
You've got so many duties that are related to this in your job as MLA. Why don't you start by telling us some of those things that you're doing that are focused on inclusion, equity, the things that we're talking about?
Yeah, okay, sure. So we... when we took, or won the last election, John Horgan appointed me as the Parliamentary Secretary for Accessibility. We passed last June, we passed accessibility legislation. It's enabling legislation, so it just enables the government to start building regulations, which would be standards and such. And so we're just filling that legislation out now. So that's a lot of my work. But you know, we pass a lot of legislation in the legislature that if it isn't aimed at being inclusive, it has an inclusive component, because obviously we know everything is intersectional. So recently we passed a piece of legislation around anti-racism. So it's anti-racism data legislation. So the government will be collecting data on racism and using that to change its policies and the way it works and the way it delivers services to British Columbians.
So you're parliamentary secretary for a number of different issues, though, as well as issues related to accessibility.
No, just parliamentary secretary for accessibility, but as an MLA, I work on a lot of it.
And you work on other committees related to that.
But your government has parliamentary secretaries for some of these other areas.
So we have a parliamentary secretary for gender equity and a parliamentary secretary for anti-racism. And if you look at all the ministers and parliamentary secretaries' mandate letters, it includes components of inclusivity.
Interesting. Yeah. Your party was probably one of the first in Canada to bring in policies that said our party and our candidates have to look like our communities. And you're criticized for that. People said, well, wait a minute, that's pushing this equity thing too far. Has it been successful?
It has been successful, and I'll tell you, it's beyond just having 50% women or 50% of people in an equity-seeking group running for office. What the policy says is that if we have a sitting MLA who steps down from office, then it has to be someone from an equity-seeking group who's the next candidate. And so then you are not just have a range of 86 candidates, half of which are women, but you're putting people in seats where they can win. And that makes a really big difference. And so we have over 50% women in our caucus. We have ages from 32 to over 70. We have a lot of folks with or people of color in our caucus, and so our caucus is very diverse.
So what do you say to the white straight males like me who want to run for the NDP?
We still have 50% white straight males in our, well, not 50, I don't know if they're all white straight males, but, close to 50% men in our.
But there are people who would literally say that with a rage.
Yeah, well, what I would say to those people is that, and I'm sorry, you're white straight males. Well, we all are here, but we've had it good for a long time.
You had a good run,
right?
Yeah.
It's about time that we make room in positions of power for other folks' voices to be heard. And I only think that legislation in British Columbia is going to be a better place because of it.
Well, Dan, so we figured out how to do it in the context of picking people to run for a party, and that's great. How do we create that in a community? How do we make sure that the structures in our own community, in Chilliwack, those power structures or other structures like that, actually reflect the community that we actually live in? Because it's not just all old white men like Paul and I that are in the community. We have a very diverse community, but it's many of the institutions in our communities don't look like the community actually looks like. What can a government do? What can a province do to say, okay, let's move this forward?
I don't know if there's, like, a lot of these are service clubs and stuff, so that I don't know that there's a lot that the province can say about that. Local government and local government elections, though, there's the potential that we could do something there, but also that is decided by the community. So instead of city council meetings being in the middle of the day, people who work a 9-to-5 job can never do that. So you don't have young people on city council. You have folks that are either retired or can get away from their jobs in the middle of the day. Yeah, self-employed, right? So those are the voices you're hearing from on city council. Same on school board. It's a little bit younger in the last election, but before that, the school board was, people who were retired generally. I think there was one person with a job, but he could get away from it. Yeah, exactly. So he could get away from it. And that's just, I think there's the potential that we could do something in the Local Government Act. But I also think it's up to the community. I mean, city council can decide not to have their meetings start at 3:00 in the afternoon, for instance. Yep.
They moved it to 2, actually.
Oh, now they start at 2. Well, they need to get the blue plate special. I'm joking. Please, I'm very sorry.
We have dinner at 4:30 in the afternoon. So is there something you can do with the pay structure at school boards or at the city council level so those jobs become actual jobs, so that people aren't having to, well, I can't have another job because I'm on the school board, or the meeting has to be at night because I've got to work during the day? Is that
That's a very, very interesting question. So each municipal council and school district decide their own pay structures.
At their own peril, I might add.
Exactly. So you have people in public determining how much they get paid.
Yeah.
This is why politicians, especially at the local level, are so poorly paid, because they can never give themselves a raise without getting absolutely lambasted for it. And really, school trustees and I would say city councilors too, you don't get paid enough to make it a full-time job. And by the time you work out all the events and everything you go to, it's minimum wage or less. And so, yes, young people who have to work 9 to 5 and support families don't get involved in that because it would take away too much time from their actual jobs.
On the other side of it, though, what you tend then to have is very experienced people who have a fair breadth of community involvement and experience who are running, who maybe those are the people you want in your city council. But I would challenge you that the provincial government controls the Local Government Act, which is also part of the School Act. So they could say, for a community this size, we're going to put it in the School Act or the Local Government Act how much people get paid. But that's just, we're picking hairs here, or splitting hairs. But what are some of the things that you've been, as a part of I can't remember the Parliamentary Secretary, involved in accessibility? What are the things that you've seen? Because I know you travel around the province and you looked at some of those issues. What are the real issues regarding accessibility? Because it's not just physical accessibility, it's accessibility to work, it's accessibility to institutions, it's all of those things. What were some of the key issues? Because that really gets at the heart of the issue of inclusivity, building a more inclusive community. What were the things that you noticed going around that you think really need to start changing?
Well, obviously, my lived experience is a physical one, and so I notice a lot of physical challenges. Even Victoria, you have to order a wheelchair cab 24 hours in advance.
Really?
Never had to do that in Chilliwack. Chilliwack is
Really?
15 to 40 minutes, maybe. I can get a wheelchair cab. I have to order one 24 hours in advance in Victoria. So for that reason, I obviously don't use cabs. But there's a ton of issues that you wouldn't think about. Website accessibility is very important, as well as physical accessibility, as I was talking about. But there's lots of things for people with a breadth of disabilities that make websites inaccessible to them. I can't even go through the number of accessibility issues. There's, in the Act, we define accessibility or disability as an impairment that comes up against a barrier. So it's very broad. There are so many different disabilities and so many different needs out there for folks. And there's no way I could possibly on this program
List them all.
Yeah, list them all.
But there's a lot of things people don't think about, like plain language in a website.
Absolutely, and keeping it at an appropriate length instead of a 50-page document.
Yeah.
Font sizes.
And I know myself,
sizes.
if you're saying, okay, I need to find this bit of information out, typically, even in a government website, it's a slog for somebody with all of their cognitive skills. If it was somebody that might have some sort of cognitive issues or health issues or might be visually impaired.
Yeah, a lot of people also don't think, and this is something I really found out since taking this job, is ASL versus closed caption, right? Mm-hmm. ASL, for a lot of people, that's their first language.
Oh, really?
Right? Reading English is totally different than ASL. It has different ways of constructing sentences and thoughts and stuff, like a whole different grammar to it. And so ASL interpretation is, for a lot of folks that are hard of hearing or deaf, is a lot better for them than just having straight closed captioning.
That's interesting, and I noticed that watching some American TV, how common ASL is and how rare it is on Canadian TV. I don't know why. In government broadcast, there's an ASL person all the time in the U.S. And they must be more attuned to that.
Yeah, I think they are.
Larger population.
They're a bit ahead of us when it comes to Accessibility and Disability Act. They have the ADA, which was passed.
Been in place since the 1980s. Late 70s, early 80s.
So, but our legislation seeks to change attitudinal barriers, which are probably the hardest barriers to change. The Americans with Disabilities Act is more about if you don't get accommodation, you can sue. Right? Yeah. So it actually puts the onus on folks with disabilities, whereas our act, we're really trying to change culture and change attitudinal barriers so that everyone, you see a way that someone can't participate fully in the community, in life. I think most people, when they see it and understand it, I think most people do their best to make things accessible for people. So. But I think it's overall a societal, attitudinal kind of culture change.
I think in this episode that we're recording, we are going to explore those issues about the attitudinal barriers that people experience in our community, people who may have who may come from places that have been traditionally devalued in our society or discriminated against in our society. Certainly people with disabilities is one, but people who come from an Indigenous community. There is racism in our community. I'm sure that's not a surprise to people. People come from the LGBTQ community. There's discrimination in that community. Is that some of the are some of the barriers that you're looking at? Is that some of the work that you're doing as well?
Yeah, well, so working on the accessibility piece of accessibility legislation, in the accessibility legislation itself, it implicitly says that, you know, disability and barriers to full participation in life is intersectional. So, you know, the average Canadians, on average, about 25% identify as having a disability. I think it's 926,000 British Columbians. But if I was an Indigenous woman living on reserve, the numbers are, the percentage of folks living with disabilities in those situations is much higher. And so we know that, we're aware of that, and we're designing our legislation and our standards and regulations around that.
Interesting. So we've got lots to look forward to in terms of some of that social policy legislation that's coming out. What's a kind of a timetable when things kind of start rolling out and we start seeing big changes in terms of regulations and legislation?
Well, we just made a big change in the spring where I want to say prescribed organizations, but that's a little bit of a technical language. What we've done is we've taken 750 organizations, all public sector, very close to government kind of organizations like municipalities, school districts, et cetera, across the province. And they're required now to develop an accessibility plan, have an accessibility committee, and have a feedback tool, which are the three things that government in general has to have too. So we've done, we've prescribed those organizations. Then what we've done is government's come out with its own accessibility plan. So we specifically name things in each ministry that we're going to work on and that we're going to accomplish in our accessibility plan, as well as we give ourselves shout outs for things we've already done.
No.
The Maple Bay campgrounds, for instance, I think the cabins there are just wonderful. And then we're developing a feedback mechanism tool, whatever you want to call it, and we should be rolling that out in the fall so that folks, if they're interacting with government and trying to get services from government and find it inaccessible, they can give us feedback and we can address that.
That's awesome.
And then we've chose our first two standards to develop. Standards generally take about 2 years, but we're doing two in conjunction. So we're going to do customer service and employment at the beginning. So
it's a great place to start.
Yeah.
Great place to start.
That's great. Well, thanks so much, Dan, for taking some time to chat with us today. We know how busy life is for you, and we appreciate it a lot.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it and get to talk a little bit about it. I could talk much longer, but I know you guys are time limited.
Well, and we've got a panel coming on to talk about some of the issues that we've raised here, and we're really excited about that. But thanks, Dan, and we hope we can do this again soon.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Great.
Take care.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Welcome back. Our panel is Teri Westerby and Gracie Kelly. Our subject is inclusion and building an inclusive Chilliwack. Gracie, let's start with you. Who is Gracie Kelly, and why is this subject important to you?
Well, good day. My name is Gracie Kelly. My family roots are from Thawali Casta-Haklip, so that's Thawali Reserve, and Fountain First Nations out in Lillooet, where my family roots are from. Inclusion means to me all about the connection to community belonging. And it's all about who we are as Indigenous, on how we basically create that wonderful cultural teachings, and how we have taken care of our families, generations past and generations future.
Teri, why is this subject important to you?
I concur a lot with what Gracie says. Inclusion means that everybody has a chance to succeed. It means that everybody has their needs met and everybody's connected to their community and has a future.
Well, let me jump right in with the first question. When Paul and I talked about doing a show on inclusion and building a more inclusive community, one of the things that stuck out to us is that too often the things that we tend to do that say, okay, there, we're building a more inclusive community, like, and I'll probably get criticized for this, but painting a rainbow crosswalk, which I think is a wonderful idea and it's a wonderful symbol, but that's really all it is. And does it give the folks that say, oh, okay, we'll let you paint a rainbow crosswalk, does it give them an out when it comes to inclusion? Okay, we've done enough. I think that's the way to describe it. We've done enough there. We've got a crosswalk. Is that enough? And are those symbols important? And should we keep looking to do more of those as a way to build inclusion? Or are there better things that we can do?
I definitely think it's a great question. I think that when it comes to symbols of inclusion and representing people, you can never have enough. A lot of people tend to need reminders that people exist, and often if you're afraid of someone or a certain group of people, it means that you haven't been exposed to them enough or at all, and you've kind of created someone in your mind or a boogeyman in your mind in a sense of that group. So the more symbols that there are to represent more people, that means that more people are reminded that other people exist and that there's a diverse group out there. The whole community is diverse, and especially when it comes to rainbows, rainbows represent everyone. That's what they're meant to do. They're meant to symbolize the spectrum of human nature and humanity. And so the more symbols of that, I think the better. But I do agree that it's not enough. Like, we should have more than that, but that doesn't mean we can't have rainbow crosswalks either.
Yes. I look at that, and you've said it so clearly, which is the rainbow signifies the depth and breadth of humanity, and how that has to be something that we include in our lives. And yet it seems like most people would identify the rainbow crosswalk as being much narrower than that it's symbolic of something more narrow.
We get people criticizing at the newspaper. They criticized us for putting a rainbow wrap on the newspaper and then saying, well, there's rainbow flags downtown. Why, like they say, why do you do that for them and you don't do something for us? Like, there's a real misunderstanding of what that means.
Yeah, the rainbow crosswalks and rainbow banners, they represent everybody. They're for everybody. What do you think about the rainbow?
I believe, you have all the colors, and I think of, these words I came up with of every heart matters. Why not really attaching that, because it's taking care of everybody, and we're all here to be together and kind of create that wonderful teaching so our children and future children can continue on with that, believing that every heart matters. It's really important.
It is really important. You're folks that would experience discrimination for various reasons in our community. And I don't think we fully understand, as folks that probably belong to a demographic, and I include Paul as old white guys.
Couple of white guys.
that we don't experience that level of discrimination, and sometimes it gets minimized. Is it real, and what does it feel like? What does it feel like? What has it felt like in this community? And I speak in broad terms of the community, not the sort of political boundaries, but in this community. What has it felt like growing up and facing that discrimination?
I've really watched Chilliwack grow to where it has been, having no street lights, to a couple of lanes on Vetter Road into Chilliwack. I'm pretty fortunate growing up not having as much discrimination as maybe my older sisters have, but I still have in my younger days and to today. Each and every day, it's kind of what is going to be around me today, and it's each and every day that there is some kind of maybe negative stigma or judgment or even gesture, whether it might be in words or comments or a telephone call or even just an email, right? So it really has become part of our identity, kind of Indigenous identity, creating that awareness that I'm here and I continue to be here to represent my family and community with my voice to ensure that there is that respectful connection. And I see it as that common approach as just awareness, let's just make it better. Yeah.
And Teri, you're president of an organization, the Community of Chilliwack Pride Society, which in and of itself, I think there's a significant amount of discrimination that comes from that. What's that like for you? How has that been growing up in this community?
Well, I grew up in Maple Ridge, which surprisingly does differ a little bit from Chilliwack in that I found there's less influence about not being allowed to be gay, whereas here in Chilliwack I find the influence is much stronger, where people have to hide who they are. They're forced to stay in the closet out of fear of being bullied or being taught, being told that they're not equal. And so for myself, being a trans person, I surprisingly, I get a lot more male privilege as a result of my transition. So having gone from being, seen as a lesbian and the types of discrimination I would face that way versus now being seen as a straight white male, I see the remarkable difference in how people treat me and how my voice makes a big difference. I find I actually have to be more careful about what I say because of the difference that my voice makes being a male. So it's been quite remarkable to see that. And so I can say for sure that even though you may not see the discrimination that you face every day, the microaggressions, they slowly add up and you internalize them. Mm-hmm. So when someone says it's not okay to be gay, it's not okay to be trans, you don't lash out and say, you tend not to lash out and say, you're wrong. You tend to take that inside and say, maybe I am broken. And so that's really what the damage that discrimination does towards people.
I always think about that microaggressions because, of course, we focus on news stories where, say, like just horrific stories where the teenagers threw like a trailer hitch and killed a girl in somewhere in Ontario, a First Nations Indigenous girl walking down the highway, and like just blatant, like that became huge sort of news. But I mean, the microaggressions are the things that like must build up where you might not even actually face one, but you think you're going to. Yes. And so there's certain situations where you might walk into. And again, it's straight white males where like there's this privilege that is denied by a lot of straight white males, I think. In fact, there's recently a backlash. There's sort of like, there's the Canadian Action Party, I think they're called, what's his name, Brad Salzberg, and he talks about like there's the country's fighting against, he calls them old stock Canadians. What he means is white people. And it's a real interesting situation because there's this denial of white privilege and where we come from, but it's hard to. I wonder how you would convince somebody like that, or how you get other people to see it from your point of view, what it's like to be, discriminated against. It sounds like an almost patronizing question because it's like, what's it feel like for you? But I don't know. It's very hard for some people in positions of power to understand. I don't know.
I'm going to jump in because I remember having this identical conversation with my daughter and trying to get that. And she said, let me ask you a question, Dad. And I said, she lives in Vancouver and works in Vancouver and commutes as a young woman in Vancouver on public transit. And she said, how many times a day are you scared? And I said, gosh, not very many. She said, how many times, like when you decide you're going to walk to the store or walk in when are you scared? And I said, I'm hardly ever. And she said, I am scared almost every damn day because I have to get on public transit, I have to walk down the street, I have to do all of these things as a young woman in a city where I don't always feel safe. She said, every day. Now, add on to that another label that we might throw on there, and that just really hit home for me. Like, how do we need to recognize these things. So let's go back what do you think of that? Does that resonate with you? Is that something that you feel? Gracie?
I believe in, the words of microaggression, and, it really is lateral violence, right? It really is that negative connotation that you just want to shame, blame, or judge, or just create kind of this image or portrayal that is just something that that person may believe in. And if they just kind of stepped back a little bit and reworded it, what if I just came in and I was just a normal person, and would they say the same comment to somebody else who just came in, regardless if there was like just a cover, and so it really is just taking that second just to, instead of just blurting out something or thinking it, right? And then just kind of being a little bit mindful, being a little bit present. And maybe did they really think about the impact? Because they probably did watch my body language or my expression on my face, or kind of like, whoa, what did you just say? Is going on in my head, right? And then for me to respectfully react instead of behave erratically, which I wouldn't do. But boy, there are times where I just kind of wonder, like, I'm just really hopeful that this person actually realized that that microaggression has been said many more times than today. And if they could just learn to build up and really see the true value of who we are, instead of making those comments that really just kind of stick with them. And if they continue to use them, I'm able to take it a little bit more humbly. I've been around the community, older age kind of thing, but if you look at it from a youth, a young adult, it might really affect them a lot differently.
I was going to say how maybe, I'll start with you actually, because just even in, let's just say 10 years, how have you seen these microaggressions? Let's focus on that a little bit. Because again, the overt acts of racism and homophobia are very rare, but the sort of niggling stuff, how have you seen that change in, say, the last decade? Like, have you seen it maybe improve? Because I feel like I saw a couple of boys walking down the street the other day near Five Corners, and they were like snuggling and cuddling and everything like that. And I was like, that's amazing, because I haven't seen that. Like, it's not a very common thing you would see, or you would have seen 15 years ago, let's just say.
Yeah.
Do you see any improvement?
I think so. Like when I graduated in 2005, so long ago,
Listen.
we were talking about tolerance.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about not even
Tolerance
just...
is such a terrible
It
word.
is, right? I don't want to be tolerated. I want to be celebrated, right?
Yeah.
People should be celebrated for who they are, not just tolerated. And so that change has definitely grown significantly. And as a result, me being told my whole life, oh, you'll be tolerated. Now children have gone through their whole lives being told you'll be celebrated. And so as a result, that hypervigilance that you were talking about, that's built into my generation and previous generations about expecting these microaggressions. They're built right into who we are because of how often we've not only experienced them, but our whole community has experienced them and shared them. So when I step out every day openly trans, I definitely expect, and I'm on alert to any of these things that may come my way, and therefore I get a little exhausted over time with this constant vigilance. But I really hope that the new generation has not been fed that message, and therefore they have more comfort being out. What are your thoughts on that?
Looking over the Indigenous curriculum, how it's been developed further with reaching all the grade levels through elementary, through high school, through post-secondary, that has definitely made a difference and made more awareness into the importance of really learning about Canada's history, and really ensuring that we are kind of learning a true history and learning how the amazing elders are mentors who share the wonderful stories. So we could really create that awareness of our earth, like Mother Earth, right? In our language, it's Sachtmach, so it really does want to encourage that grounding, that balance of awareness. And I believe wholeheartedly that, you know, not one person knows everything. We all learn from each other. And it has been better in my perspective, but I still feel that we have a long way to go yet.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as a parent of a daughter who's almost 13 and a son who's 10, they know way more about Indigenous culture from what they've learned at school than I ever certainly learned. Having said that, it was in Ontario, it was a different place, and we weren't surrounded with it as they are. But the curriculum is definitely helping, I think.
Well, I was going to say, what can we do better, and what more can we do, all of us, to make this happen? And I'm going to bring this up because I think it's really important. Teri, you're running for school board.
Yes.
In Chilliwack, and I think you can't exactly say that the school board has been a bastion of modeling inclusion in our community. It hasn't. It's in fact been significantly criticized, some members of school board, for a lack of inclusion, or in fact some saying very horrible things about groups in our society that have been excluded. Is that, I mean, I'm sure that's not the only reason you want to run for school board. What are the other reasons that you want to run for school board?
Well, thank you for asking. I've been working in the community for the past 5-6 years with the Chilliwack Pride Society, the Gender Support Network, and so on. And it's just been an organic shift for me as I continue to work within the community. I'm hearing stories over and over again about how students are missing pieces in their education because the classrooms aren't built for them. Teachers really desperately want to create better environments that teach and reach all the students. They want to support them in all the ways that they can be supported. So the teachers themselves also need support. And it was just a natural move for me to go into the Chilliwack School Board because of these gaps that I've identified and the work I've already been doing in the schools and in the community, because the community needs a champion on their side, someone who will represent all of them. And that's exactly why I want to be here today, too, to talk about inclusion, because that is my goal, is to make sure that the school board is inclusive of every student and all of their needs.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we're gonna. You saw the wandering specter saying it's time that we should have a break. So we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to be back with Teri and Gracie to talk more about what we can do to build a more inclusive Chilliwack. So we'll be back after this.
Welcome back. We're talking about inclusion with Gracie Kelly and Teri Westerby. The next sort of subject we wanted to talk about was truth and reconciliation. We can't really ignore that. It's everywhere. It's almost become buzzwords. But what is truth and reconciliation for you, and is it the way forward? Is it what we need to do in Canada?
I am the first generation to not have had to attend residential school. My parents and my grandparents are 2 generations. So it means to me the elders, the mentors, the people who have attended residential school have brought forth recommendations for us to follow. The calls to action are connected as well with the UNDRIP, the United Nations Indigenous, and it really is making sure that we are following the recommendations to ensure that this history doesn't happen again, in connection with what has happened recently with the Pope coming to Edmonton to offer an apology. I'm very grateful that it did happen in Canada, that it happened in Alberta. I do believe that our survivors that are left are listening, are heartfelt, are humbly working through their own healing journey to kind of maybe try and understand or even accept the apology. Is it a blanket statement? I believe within an apology there needs to be some action. So we have yet to hear what that may be. I just feel for the elders who have experienced and have lost not only family and community connections, but living through the seasons of the year, which we call home. So it really is making aware that we need to heal together and move forward as one. This is important work that needs to continue. It's not a checklist where you just hear, oh, we heard about the TRC today and we only need to celebrate it on September 30th or June 21st. It's more than that. And the September 30th day, I always say, in my own words, it's a day of reflection, to continue to learn the journey and build up a foundation that is going to make a difference. That's what I believe the TRC is about.
When you hear land acknowledgements, as often are now precursors to any public event, any gathering that we have in our community and certainly other places, where it's acknowledged that the land we're living on has never been ceded from the Stalo people. Is that an important piece? As Teri talked about rainbow crosswalks, is that an important piece when you hear that?
I like to call them traditional territory acknowledgement, because in you're acknowledging the traditional territories that were there before us, that have been created by our ancestors to safely live, work, and play on. So I like to call it with that title, because you're also sharing and protecting the language of maybe what that site or location might have had a traditional name, or a teaching or a gathering location that Indigenous probably has connected and created, whether it might be a family or a traditional teaching or a sharing of food along the Fraser River, for example. So traditional territory acknowledgements, I hope, will continue, and it's really with that heartfelt gratefulness and acceptance that we are on the traditional territory of the Chilliwack or the Palau tribes, and we really want to continue to respect not only the people who have made this place for us, but for our children and future children can offer the same value.
Teri, is there a truth and reconciliation that needs to happen, that sort of model with the LGBTQ community? What's your version of truth and reconciliation? Where do we need to go? Where do we need to get to with that?
It's a great question and a very great segue. I think what needs to happen with LGBT views is we also need to decolonize our mindset because our society has been built on white supremacy, patriarchy, and we need to decolonize all of that idea and decolonize sexuality and gender and dismantle it all because we are all different. We are all different people. There's no boxes for us all to fit in. When we create boxes, we all try to fit in, but we don't. No one really fits into it. So let's dismantle the box. Let's all just let ourselves be and celebrate us for who we are.
So there's a lot of power that comes with certain. If you're in the right box, you get a lot of power.
Exactly.
If you're in the wrong box, you don't get a lot of power.
Yeah.
So breaking those boxes down evens the power structure out. And I'm sorry, Paul, I'm just going to jump into one more.
Yeah.
There's a term that you use, Gracie, that I'm just so intrigued by. It's called rematriation. And that sounds like a realignment of the power structure that has existed for a long, long time. Tell me what rematriation means to you and what can we learn about that we really need to know?
I learned through a wonderful guest speaker and presenter of her book, Linda Gray. It's First Nations 101. And I read that and I go, oh my goodness, I want to blow this up and spread it out everywhere because it really is about Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing, and keep sharing the importance of what our ancestors would like us to continue on. And it also connects to the wonderful matriarchs that have created these wonderful teachings that we need to continue to follow. Because if we kind of put the elders to the side, it's not going to do us justice, because it's our job to continually respect their guidance, create that awareness and advice. And there may be experiences that we humbly have to accept, but it's all in growth. It's all in taking ownership of who we are and really focusing on how we have really valued the land, the water. It's more than just the land itself. It's about us being here.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
There's an implication in the term that we're not valuing the contribution of women in our society enough in terms of leadership. Is that what it's saying when we say rematriation? The Indigenous culture was often led through very strong and powerful women. Aspects of that, is that rematriation? Is that going back to something that values the contributions of the matriarchs again?
Really creating that role identity within not only the family, with the community, within the nation, collectively kind of sharing with one another who maybe those gifts are that were bestowed upon us, and how are we sharing those gifts so that they don't get forgotten. For example, the words in our Halkomelem language, it all has purpose, right? All of our words have a purpose to signify, whether it might be Silalim, the seasons of the year, or in some of the work we do as part of cultural teachings, or sharing traditional wellness practices. So it's creating a healthier, not only self, but community and nation as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's next for you guys when you start looking down the road? What are the goals that you have? We know about the school board, yes, and you can mention that again, and that's fine. But both you, Teri and Gracie, where do you want to go in furthering the building of a more inclusive community?
What I would add to that question is when you're facing like real obstacles, like certain school board trustees or just outright racism, like how do you ignore that and you just speak to the middle, or how do you dismantle that sort of?
You want to start?
Sure. I go for it and I say, let's talk about it.
Okay.
Oh yeah, because I could stand aside and just kind of hope that it doesn't happen again, but acknowledge it and learn from the experiences. It's okay to have uncomfortable conversations. Yeah. They're healing, right? They bring awareness to maybe something that was important enough for me to raise, right? I don't confront the person, but I just kind of say, here, let's talk about what happened and let's make it better.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with that completely. Not everyone has had a life where the aggressions that they face, they can do so openly and face head on. Sometimes they've had a life of abuse, and those types of aggressions they can't stand up for or against. But myself, I plan to stand against them. I've been given this beautiful privilege that I'm going to lean into and speak out for people and speak up for people and create space for people to speak out for themselves, so that they know and feel safe to advocate for themselves where they normally might not feel like they have an ally. And any space that I'm in, that's what I try to do, make sure that they have space to speak for themselves. Because I find that if you are uncomfortable with a group, you need more exposure to it. And so if there's people who are uncomfortable speaking to or about gay issues or LGBT issues, I want to have an open door and grace for them, because you don't always know what you're going to say, or if you might say the wrong thing, and you shy away from having those conversations because you don't want to be attacked. I want to give grace to people to have those conversations with me, because I have been given the grace of having a wonderful supportive family, supportive friends. I've never been bullied or talked down to or treated with violence or aggression. And as a result, I feel like I have the resiliency to step up for people. So my long-term goal is to create a more inclusive Chilliwack.
Let us know how we can help. I think you said something really, really important, and that's we have to make it okay to have those discussions. And quite often, I know people who are very progressive in the way they might think, and as a small p progressive in the way they might think, but they're afraid to have conversations because they don't want to say the wrong thing. I'm very afraid of being offensive. We've a long history of offending people with thoughtless things that we say, so we choose to be quiet instead of saying something. And I know some of the new language we have to learn around pronouns, as an example, is difficult because it's hard because we know how important it is to the person we might be talking to that, say, has a they/them pronoun. We're afraid we're going to mess it up. I know I have a friend, and I know that I'm terrified that I'm going to offend that person.
Yeah, and the language, and constantly it's changing. Every time we learn something new, we fold it into our knowing. And so in the last 10 years, things have changed a lot. Even the concept of pronouns is fairly new in the sense that it's in the general public now. More people are talking about pronouns and things like that, whereas it was kind of just something within the community that we talked about. And for the longest time, people would say preferred pronouns, but now we just say just pronouns, because calling them preferred pronouns means that there's an option in it. Whereas there's no option. Call me he, him, nothing more. And so it's not a preference, it's just who I am. I am he, him. So that's changed very quickly, and now people are, and as the result of it changing, people are afraid to talk. But I think that when you live it, you really have no choice but to give grace, because it happens to you every day. And if you show that you care and that you mean well, and you just quickly correct and you apologize, then I think that the people in your life will know that you don't mean poorly by it. And if you're showing that you're making an effort to grow and to change, the people in your life will appreciate that.
That's
They
really
do
good
at
advice.
the provincial court now. The lawyers are all required to say my pronouns are, which is interesting because there's a couple of lawyers, including like Barry Neufeld's lawyer, who said, "I'm still a guy." I remember him saying in court one day. I was like, but I've made a mistake where there was a lawyer with a traditionally female name, and I said her, and she politely emailed me.
That's right.
She read the story from Vancouver or wherever and said, actually, my pronouns are they, them. And I was like, oh, sorry.
At the end of the day, I tend to make a bit of a joke when I say, do it for men named Kim.
My best friend's name is Ashley. He's a guy. So.
Exactly. and that's why I kept the spelling of my name Teri. I was originally named after my grandma, and she was
pretty.
Yeah, she was called Teri, but she was spelled Terry. And so my parents named me Teri, Teri, and I decided to keep that spelling.
Yeah, that's totally.
Well, one of my favorite emerging playwrights, who's also a friend, their name is Jake Margaret Archer.
Jake Margaret.
And a brilliant playwright. And I think it's delicious. I just, because of how they've chosen to say who they are through their name. So it's
and would a rose by any other name smell as sweet?
exactly. Well, we've just had a ball, and I've got a feeling we're going to have to do it again because
we can dive deep into either, if we separate these even, the LGBT issues or Indigenous issues.
And we didn't even
Anywhere.
touch
Yeah.
upon about 10 other
That's right.
groups I believe are underrepresented significantly in the life and breadth of our community that experience significant discrimination simply because of a label they may have or such. So this is a great start, and I think it's in some ways it's a really good start, because I think we're starting in a place where we need to start. These are areas that really need change in our community, and we need to do a better job of it. So my thanks to you for
Thanks
doing
very
that.
much for coming,
And,
guys.
It's been
we'll be
great.
back real soon, Paul and I, with more of our Chilliwack Now program. Thank you so much for watching.